Hello and welcome back to the Morbid Moonlight 31 Days of Felissa Rose, which is my take on the horror movie a day during the month of October challenge, where we will be looking at a new film featuring the thespian talents of the amazing Felissa Rose each and every day this month. Today, it is my pleasure to chat about a film from, of course, 2019, and that is the movie A Nun's Curse, written and directed by Mr. Tommy Faircloth. Of course, this is one of a spate of films about nuns that were suddenly rushed out on the cheap a couple of years ago to coincide with the Conjuring spin-off film The Nun. Because getting your hands on a nun's habit isn't really that hard to do, it's quite a nice, easy, cheap look to go for, it was suddenly seen as a really easy type of film to pull off for the low-budget gang. And whilst the legit nun film didn't actually do that great for itself, we had this rash of cheap, nasty nun films that just kept splurging out. We had Bad Nun, Bloody Nun, Curse of the Nun, Bloody Nun 2, The Curse, Bad Nun, Deadly Vows, and of course Nuns, an Italian Horror Story. And those are just the films that have got nun in the title. Basically, it was a shit show of nuns raining down on us for quite a while. All films with similar looking covers that sounded almost identical. Now, most horror fans kinda just avoided the subject altogether just because they all looked like very cheap rip-offs. Like when Stephen King's It remake came out and suddenly there were fuck tons of evil clown films everywhere, most of which were appalling. This kind of jumping on the bandwagon, of course, is nothing new, especially not for horror, but often what happened was that filmmakers were relying on customers just picking up any old shitty film with a nun on the front, and by the time that movie hit your DVD player, it was too late because they'd already got your money. By that point, it didn't really matter if your film cost $100,000 or 50 cents. The person watching it realised they were watching a knockoff, and to your average viewer, a knockoff is a knockoff, and degrees of cheapness just get flattened down into this general disgust for something that doesn't look like the Avengers, and so it goes in the bin. Unfortunately, that kind of thinking often encourages knockoffs these days to be made as cheaply as possible, basically relying on sandbagging cash from lazy consumers. But to be honest, with DVDs kind of phasing out, I wonder just how popular this kind of thing is going to be soon. But anyway, A Nun's Curse is both an obvious knockoff and one that's very cheap. But if you've stuck with me this far, then you should know that cheapness isn't really that much of a problem, it's what you do with it that really matters. So, A Nun's Curse follows a group of 4 characters, 2 sisters Ashley Kay and Gabby, and their male friends Anthony and Michael. The sisters don't really get on and they bicker a lot, and when the film opens, the younger sister Ashley Kay, who's going to be our heroine, is taking pictures of old ruins because she's the kind of person who's shown to us as being slightly kind of bookish, socially awkward, and she's obsessed as well with local history, especially that of this abandoned old prison that legend has it is haunted. After a bit of persuasion, she encourages our gang to tag along and check out the prison as she investigates the legend of the evil nun that haunts this rundown old prison. And sure enough, we know what sort of thing's going to happen. Now, there's some interesting stuff going on here. First off, for a pretty cheap little film like this, a short runtime is always advisable, and A Nun's Curse hits the sweet spot of being under 75 minutes, which means that by rights, you should not be getting bored here. The bizarre thing is that A Nun's Curse is brought to us by Mr. Tommy Faircloth, who is the guy who directed Family Possessions, which I reviewed a couple of days ago, which was this haunted house film which ran just short of being 2 hours, which suggested that Mr. T. Faircloth has learned his lessons by making something that's a lot quicker paced. Another lesson he seems to have learned is with his casting. Remember when I was talking about Family Possessions and I said that I much preferred the friend character Maggie to the lead? Well, the good news here is that the actress who played Maggie in Family Possessions, who is Erica Edwards, is back for Nun's Curse, and she's playing the lead this time around, and she is just a really likeable and understated actress, and in a lot of ways, it's her charisma that carries a lot of A Nun's Curse. The sad news is that this is Erica Edwards' last acting role to date, but I hope to see a lot more of her in the future. She seems to be more concerned with directing things at the moment, which is cool, but it would be a shame if she left acting, because she is a really solid and interesting screen presence, miles away from being the obvious kind of cardboard cutout bimbo that you get in so many crappy horror films that think a bit of cheap TNA is more important than decent characterization. But apart from Erica Edwards though, our other 3 characters are kind of fun, slightly goofy bunch who kind of banter and bicker amongst each other, with the kind of campus sniping going to Ashley's sister Gabby, played by Christy Ray, who is this kind of straightforwardly just obnoxious mean girl character throughout. In general, a lot of the dialogue seems really kind of weirdly petty, with a lot of their patter sounding like stuff that I remember hearing as a kid from the early 2000s, and I like to think that I winced at this kind of shit even back then. It just seems a little bit kind of immature and childish, really, and there's that general feeling like A Nun's Curse is pitching things a little bit for a younger audience, maybe, as in perhaps like 12 to 15, which is something that I thought about Family Possessions as well, now that I think about it. There's that general kind of open, amiable, but slightly tame feeling of the sort that you get in something like maybe a Proportion Productions film, where nothing's too nasty or tough, and it kind of feels like this quite reasonable TV movie with occasional kind of bloody scenes thrown in. I don't have a problem with this particularly because I actually think that deliberately chucking in gore and swearing just to make your film seem adult often has the opposite effect, as in something like a Slaughter Party, that feels just aggressively juvenile. Horror films don't always need to be nasty or stomach-churning, and I think that A Nun's Curse is maybe a nice little gateway horror that kind of coasts along on this fairly straightforward, fun series of interactions between its cast, before it then goes on to drop in a few decent scares. Now, the interesting thing as well is that this is another starring or title role for Felissa Rose, inasmuch as she is the first name in the cast, as well as playing the nun of the title, Sister Monday. I can't really say that she does the best job in the world here, to be honest, but it's more of a part than she had in Family Possessions. And it's good to know that Mr. Faircloth is a director who's clearly struck up a good working relationship with Felissa Rose, enough to promote her from a very small part to essentially a leading role. Most of A Nun's Curse follows this group of 4 youngsters though, and there's a few scenes of nun action just thrown in for good measure in flashback before the inevitable final showdown. I can't help but think that Felissa Rose often kind of looks maybe a bit too glamorous to be that convincing as a nun, and I think that she suits playing a slightly larger style of villain, something more theatrical, like in Lilith, where she was really great, whereas it's hard to say if it's the part or not, but I think her attempting to kind of try and do this is kind of like a Nurse Ratched kind of thing, just this ultra calm, but with the sort of hint of being unstable underneath thing. Not always that successful, to be honest. Maybe it's just the fact that I don't really buy into the nun outfit as being a great horror look at the end of the day. Again, though, it is good to see Felissa getting a chance to try out something different, and at least she gets another crack at playing a legit horror villain here, and actually gets, in what's a very short film, some decent screen time. I think it deserves a Felissa factor of maybe 4 out of 10, because she only gets just a few intermittent scenes to do her stuff, and I don't think she's really ever called upon to bust out much in the way of heavy acting. But as for a rating, well, it's difficult to say. To be honest, I know that this is the kind of film that most horror fans just wouldn't really care for, just because it is quite tame and it's fairly run-of-the-mill, but I did have quite a good time with it. I think that if your cast is likeable enough and can convince you of their dynamics, and you actually don't mind spending time with them, just doing their thing, then that can make all the difference, and I think that A Nun's Curse has bagged itself a pretty solid cast. But, ratings anyway, I'm probably going to have to land at a 5 out of 10 for A Nun's Curse. I didn't mind it at all. It's not one of those cheap waste of time film any old shit and we're done films, but one that actually takes some time with its characters, and though it's definitely very basic, it's also pretty entertaining and it doesn't ever feel lazy or cynical. Is the ending great? Well, that's another question. But that should be enough for one day, and that is a wrap for day number 19 of the 31 Days of Felissa Rose. I hope that you enjoyed it. Help us out with a like or a comment or subscription, and hopefully we will see you back here tomorrow for day number 20 of the 31 Days of Felissa Rose. See you later, alright?